That was a public information film from the UK government. Highlights of Manchester United and Liverpool. It's match of the day in an hour here on BBC One. But right now, we join Fiona Bruce.
Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Robert Buckland, the government's Justice Secretary, previously a member of both Theresa May and David Cameron's governments. Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary and third in the Labour Party leadership contest in 2020, Lisa Nandy. Joining us down the line, Kate Forbes, Finance Secretary in the SNP government at Holyrood. Michelle Dewberry, former apprentice winner, parliamentary candidate for the Brexit Party at the last general election, now about to become a presenter for GB News. And journalist, broadcaster and author, Paul Mason. Good evening. Welcome to my guest here in the studio. Kate, welcome to you, joining us down the line. Very good to see you. And, of course, welcome to our QT50 audience. Very good to see your faces again this week and a couple of new ones too. And to you at home, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And if you want to join in the conversation, you can in the usual way, of course, on social media at BBC Question Time. And we'll hear what you've got to say. So let's take our first question tonight, which is from Chris Sharp.
Thank you, Fiona. What is the point of the Labour Party?
Well, that gets straight to the point, doesn't it, Lisa?
Well, the point of the Labour Party is to go out and deliver a fairer, better, more just country, the sort of country that we haven't seen for quite some time. We went into this pandemic with our foundations very, very weakened, huge strain on our public services before COVID even hit, huge and lengthening waiting lists in the NHS, A&E, overcrowded, and a crisis of social care, and many, many parts of the country that had seen economic decline and austerity for some time. And we've got to go out. None of that
was enough to convince voters in the recent elections, was it? So what's the point of the Labour Party with the situation the Labour Party's in right now?
Let me say this to you. I don't buy this at all. I've been re-elected 4 times in Wigan.
Don't buy what at all, exactly?
The idea that there is... The local elections show that there is no support for the Labour Party in this country, and I'll tell you why.
Well, not
because if you look across the country,
an awful lot.
You know, in Greater Manchester, where Andy Burnham was winning in very different places, like Manchester and Wigan, where I've been elected 4 times in the last decade. If you look at parts of the country like Wales, where Mark Drakeford is delivering for those communities the most successful UK vaccine rollout in the whole of the United Kingdom. If you look at Bristol, where Marvin Rees is delivering clean energy, better buses and a living wage. I think our job is not to do navel-gazing, no more pamphlets, no more self-introspection. Our job is to go out and show people that we can deliver for the people of this country. And why does it matter? I'll tell you why. Because when I look at this government, what I see is a decade of broken promises. They've stripped money out of our communities while telling them they're going to level them up. They say they'll invest in our people and then they cut nurses' pay. They say they'll fix social care and then we have a Queen's speech where they failed to do it. It is not good enough. When it comes to the crunch, when they are asked to make big, major decisions, they are not on the side of those communities. And that's why we've got to stop the introspection in the Labour Party. We can win. We are winning in parts of Britain, and we're going to go out and fight for the future of this country.
Michelle?
Well, I think her question is very key. The Labour Party, I think they are in the midst of a serious identity crisis at this moment in time. Everybody probably by now will have read Tony Blair's piece and have opinions on it, where he said that the Labour Party almost needs to be deconstructed and reconstructed. I completely agree. I think at the moment, the Labour Party, to me, feel more concerned about identity politics than they do about representing what used to be their base, which was the traditional working classes. Even one of your own MPs said that there's more talk about should we be pulling the Churchill statue down as opposed to building up the working classes people. Pardon?
From the Prime Minister, not from the Labour Party. I can tell you, nobody in my constituency of Wigan was talking about it. They couldn't understand at all why the Prime Minister was obsessed by it. And let me say this to you, Michelle, as well. I've been elected 4 times in the last decade by working class people in Wigan. How many times have you been elected?
I have not been elected once, but I tell you what, if it wasn't for people like me, the Brexit Party at the last election, there would have been way fewer Labour MPs than they are now. And this is one of the problems. In 40 years, Labour have won, I think, 3 elections. And if you continue as you are now, in my view, you will be unelectable for a very long time to come.
But what do you actually want us to do? Because I've heard lots of talk about deconstruction, but very little, particularly from the Brexit Party, about how you solve some of the problems for people in this country.
Well,
people need good jobs in this country. They don't need more division, which is all the party that you stood for was offering.
Yeah, so let's just be clear, by the way, because I know Paul's itching to get in as well. So I don't represent the Brexit Party. I ran firstly as an independent, and then I ran secondly as a Brexit Party candidate. I'm not involved with that party, which is now Reform. So I'm not sitting here, absolutely not, as a representative of any political party at all. And Paul will come in now, but in answer to your question, you know, what do I want you to do? Well, I want you to decide who it is that you represent. I would like you to move more back towards the centre, stop with all of these bizarre identity politics which turn people off.
That's not us.
And very briefly, before, because I know Paul wants to come in, there was a cartoon, I think it was in Private Eye, and the cartoon depicts a Labour councillor knocking on the door saying, something along the lines of, why won't you xenophobes vote for us anymore in Labour? And this is the point. You see a lot of Brexiteers as racist, xenophobic idiots.
That is absolutely
well,
not
I disagree,
true.
and I think you do. I
Well,
think
let's
that
bring
is how you feel.
Let me bring someone else. Paul, I do hope you want to come in. Michelle's named you 3 times now, so let's hear what you've got to say.
Yes, to answer the original question, what the point of the Labour Party is to take all the hope, all the aspiration, all the determination and pride of working class communities and turn that into a programme of government that brings things for them. Because let's face it, what they're up against extremely powerful people with a private education, with inherited money, for whom life will always get better. But the system we're in makes life often worse, generation after generation, for working class people.
And so why do you think Labour has not appealed to them in the numbers obviously that you would like to see?
I live in a working class Labour heartland. It's called South London. The only contest where I come from is between the Labour and the Greens. And the people who vote for them are not kind of oatmeal latte sipping kind of middle class people. They're just as working class as the people in Hull you tried and failed to represent, and who you tried and failed to divide on racist grounds. That's our working class.
This is my point. Do you think Brexiteers are racist?
No, I do think the Brexit Party is a racist party.
Do you think Brexiteers are racist?
No, because at one point I was one myself as the presenters of Question Time.
You do a very good job of pretending that is what you think then.
Well, you don't know, I'm sorry, that I was on Question Time and argued that we should accept Brexit, OK? Now, let me come back to this. The point is, the weekend, that whole thing, Saturday and Sunday off, that's what Labour brought you. The NHS, that whole thing, free healthcare.
Yeah, but the question is, what's the point of the Labour Party now?
Yes, well, the point of it now is to bring the modern equivalence, which is a better healthcare system, a social care system, so that people whose elderly relatives are, needing full-time care do not end up losing all their savings. That's what the Labour has argued consistently.
And where's it lost its appeal then?
Well, I'll tell you where it's lost its appeal. First of all, where it's lost its appeal is in the small towns that me and Lisa both come from that have been left behind by 30 years of free market economics. Absolutely, because it's failed to represent them. It has failed to represent them. I'm from, as I said, a Labour heartland. I want us to reach out back to the places we come from and prove to those voters that if we carry on with a bunch of corrupt, super rich people running this country, there's nothing in it for them.
This is the problem. The Labour Party is very good at telling us what it doesn't like. It's very good at telling us what the divisions are in our country. What it's useless at is actually coming up with prescriptions. They're having a conversation amongst themselves at the moment, Fiona. They're not in a position even to begin a conversation with the country because, frankly, they don't know what they want.
This is unbelievable.
We're
From
waiting.
a party that had the former Prime Minister in Parliament today talking about a corruption scandal at the heart of government, cosy financial relationships that allowed people to take risks and win big, and when they lost, it was people in Hartlepool and Rotherham who shouldered the appalling losses.
Don't lecture me about ordinary people.
I will lecture you about that. It was laid bare today.
No,
it's disgraceful.
I was elected 4 times and I've been elected 4 times in a town full of ordinary people, Swindon, which used to be a Labour seat. Now, are you telling me that the people of Swindon are stupid or thick or wrong because they voted Conservative?
No, I'm not.
Because that's the message that's coming across from the Labour Party.
Hang on a minute.
You're
are you
insulting the voters.
Are you telling me that
and that's
people
no
in
way
places
that
like,
you're going to ever have a hope of power. You don't deserve it.
If you're telling me that people in places like Wigan and Manchester and London are stupid for voting for the Labour Party, then you can think again,
Lisa,
Robert.
I went to Hartlepool.
Appalling argument.
I went to Hartlepool and spoke to people on the doorsteps. I can tell you, they were fed up of Labour promises and no delivery. People living in the Headland estate in Hartlepool, not your traditional Tory voters. I can tell you what they were telling me. They were telling me they were not voting Labour. They were turning away from the Labour Party because the party did not reflect their values, Lisa. You can talk as much as you like, but that's the reality.
Don't talk across each other, because otherwise no one will hear.
This is the sort of arrogance that will not serve you well.
It's not arrogant.
In 2019, the Prime Minister said he would level up this country. And then what has he done in this Queen's speech? He's broken his promise to fix the social care crisis. Who shoulders the loss of those promises the most?
Lisa,
it's people in places like Hartlepool, where the population is ageing, where they're at the sharp end of the social care crisis.
Okay, I'm going to
you break promise after promise to them, and it will not serve you well.
You're just
You're not doing anything about it.
In this room, sorry, no, Michelle, I'm sorry, just wait one second, because in this room, we also listen to the public, and there's lots of hands up in our audience. So I just want to hear, and then I'll let you all come back in. And Kate, you're sitting there very, very calmly and quietly. I will come to you as well. Joe, you've got your hand up. Let's hear from you.
Firstly, Paul, oatmeal drinking latte people. I mean, what planet are you on? I consider myself to be as equal to anybody else that's working class. I work blooming hard, I pay my bills, and I look after my own affairs. Lisa, your behaviour just completely depicts why people don't want to vote Labour, because all you've done is point the finger and throw stones at anybody who dares to question you. This is why I really would not put my vote on your Labour ballot paper, because this is exactly what we get. Exactly what we get. Conservatives are no better, but do you know what? I am just sick to the back teeth of hearing you whinge on at every other person who criticises you. Sick of it.
Rose?
Yeah, so I have voted Labour all my life, and this is the first time this past election I had to seriously sit down and think about whether I would vote Labour. The majority of my life has been a Tory government, and what I do know for sure is I do not want it to continue to be a Tory government. But isn't Labour the natural division between it now? I don't think it is, and that's because it's lost its heart. The previous leader had heart, and you could believe in him. Starmer saying stuff like Black Lives Matters was just a moment. It's not. It's the social justice that the Labour Party was founded on. I could be proud to vote for, and I don't feel the same way anymore.
Martin?
Oh, thank you. We need the Labour Party to be better. The country needs a strong opposition that actually, people like me will vote for. I've voted for all parties in my lifetime, and I want there to be a Labour Party that is good. And it provides hope and inspiration for people. But it isn't at the moment. You're fighting between yourselves. You appear to be a London-centric party that isn't kind of reaching out across the country. So you need to do something.
Tony?
Yes, thank you, Fiona, and good evening. I don't need to be lectured on somebody from South London about politics in the northeast of England. I lived in Hartlepool. I now live in Durham. Durham was a Labour stronghold for 100 years, and now it's lost its majority. Out of 126 county councillors, only 53 are now Labour. And I'll tell you why that happened. It's because the Labour Party in Durham just didn't listen to what people were saying. They've just squandered £50 million of public money building themselves a new headquarters on a floodplain next to the River Wear. Unbelievable. And then spent more money for flood defences, and then spent even more money to have a roof terrace. Where does it all end? Because they didn't listen, they've been voted out, and that's going to happen and happen again. So, Lisa, you should take the message back to your leaders. Start listening to what the public wants. Start listening, and you might get some good advice.
Kate, let's come to you.
Well, talking about elections, and we've had a lot of talk of elections already this evening, we've just had one in Scotland in which the majority of voters rejected Labour and the Conservatives, and saw the SNP get the biggest vote share in the history of the Scottish Parliament. And it's a very appropriate question because we've seen the Labour Party get their worst result in Scotland. They've lost seats, they've seen the worst vote share. And I guess having changed leaders both in Scotland and across the UK, it's quite clear it wasn't about the messenger, it's about the message. You can change the leader, but that's not changing the results. And my question would be, what does Labour stand for? Because there's two key flaws as I see it from Scotland. The first is that Labour and the Tories are two sides of the same coin in Scotland. They continuously side with the Tories. From my perspective, they're willing to leave Scotland's future and key powers in a Tory government's hands, which is fatal when it comes to Scotland. But the second flaw is taking voters for granted. You cannot take voters for granted. Voters need to be respected. You need to understand why the message is not getting through. Now, from my perspective, again, in Scotland, there are some very weighty issues, and we've just seen a Labour campaign which is completely neglected to engage with those key issues, not least big ones on the Constitution. So that, from my perspective here in Scotland, seeing the Labour Party get its worst result would be two of the fundamental flaws that we see at the heart of the Labour Party.
So, Lisa, the last few times you've appeared on this programme, you're speaking from your attic. You might be wishing you were back there now. I mean, you're obviously going to expect slings and arrows from the other parties, but when you hear people in our audience who either want to vote Labour or have voted Labour and now don't feel they can give you their vote, it must be profoundly depressing.
It is. It hurts. It absolutely hurts. And it's not something that is new to me as somebody who represents a town in the northwest of England that, as Paul said, has seen decades of economic decline, who've looked to political leaders and not seen any political party who'll step forward and deliver for them, but particularly feel that personally from the Labour Party, who they expected to do so.
And do you think Keir Starmer can turn this around?
I do.
I mean, he says that Labour has lost the trust of the working people.
I think we can turn it around, but I think it's absolutely clear, not just from the election results, but from what the audience has been saying tonight, that we've got a job of work to do, not just to go out with policies, but actually to earn back people's trust. And I'll just say very directly to Martin, who said that he'd voted for every political party and that he would consider voting Labour, but we had more work to do. I will make it my mission to convince people like you that you can trust us again. In the end, what we desperately want to do as a Labour Party is to show that all those things that Andy Burnham is delivering in Greater Manchester, that Marvin Rees is delivering in Bristol, that Sadiq Khan is delivering in London and Mark Drakeford is delivering in Wales can be a reality for people in this country. Opportunities for young people, good jobs so you don't have to get out to get on.
And is that, do you
not
think,
just levelling up places, but levelling up the people in them.
And do you think that is by forming some kind of alliance, formally or informally, as your former leader, Tony Blair, has suggested, with the Lib Dems, with the Greens?
Look, I haven't read the Tony Blair piece. I haven't read many of these pieces because I'm not so much interested in what the Labour Party deconstructs or doesn't deconstruct. I'm interested in the country and how we fix the very many problems in this country after 11 years of Tory government. And I would just say that, you know, at the end of the day, I will work with whoever it takes to deliver change for my community and for my country, whether that's the Conservative Party or progressive parties as well. But there is no substitute for winning the argument and winning back people's trust. And that's what you've heard tonight, and that is exactly what we in the Labour Party are going to set out to do.
But if you're so keen on winning back people's trust, and Hartlepool has come up lots of times this evening already, why on earth, in a by-election, in a place that's voted almost 70% for Brexit, you're sitting there saying, I want to win your trust back? You stick a Remainer in there. If I was in Hartlepool as a resident, whether I was a former voter for Labour or considering voting for you, I would just be looking at you thinking, are you guys mad?
Look, Michelle, we didn't stick a Remainer in there because at the end of the day, we've got to leave these labels behind. I'm somebody who campaigned for and voted for Remain.
But you did, that's exactly what you did.
And then tried to get a Brexit deal through and voted for it twice under Boris Johnson before the election and since. And I'm sick to death of us all being labelled, actually, as Leavers and Remainers, as left-behind communities, as oat-drinking, latte-drinking, whatever it was that we said before. I'm sick of these labels. We've got to stop the division and we've got to start bringing the country together again. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. We come through this together or we don't come through it at all.
much of politics now is about identity, culture and values. And I think that the people who have understood that quickest have been the Conservatives. And actually the people who have understood it most successfully have been Kate's Scottish National Party. Because the Scottish cosmopolitan national identity is real, they represent it. Mark Drakeford in Wales represents a feeling about being Welsh, more than just Labour. So those profoundly working class communities in Wales, solidly Labour. Andy Burnham, Andy Burnham didn't just win central Manchester. He won the seats, including where I come from, where they voted Tory, because he projected something, a narrative, something that allowed him to sort of stand beyond the different identities. And believe me, we know, northwestern little towns have identities that we almost hate each other. Yeah. No, what Keir hasn't done yet is that. That's what, as simple as that. He needs policies, a narrative, a goal, a clear story to tell. I supported him and continue to support him because I think he's the person to do that. But it's not as easy as when Labour used to be able to weigh these votes in these places. Those votes have to be earned. That means understanding what has caused these deep cultural divisions. And certainly you can't go with them. You can't pick one side. You've got to say, right, we need to find something that is common to all the people on that weird screen in front of us with their different angers. They all have an anger about something legitimate. And I think that what Labour has to find is that what is common to that, just as it did in 1945, 1964, and I believe that by doing that, it can offer the country a different prospect to a bunch of crooks, because that's who we're ruled by.
I better let you answer that before, because I want to move on to take another question. But
if you keep on insulting your opponents, you're insulting the people who vote in their millions for the Conservative Party. That's people of all shades of opinion in our country, wherever they're from, whatever their background. If you keep on dissing us, don't be surprised if you keep losing. Let's have some respect for each other and respect for people who vote may be different from yours. I was brought up in South Wales, in Llanelli, right? Yep. I don't need any lectures about
You haven't won a seat in South Wales in Llanelli,
I was a councillor in Llanelli as a Tory, right? I actually broke through and won there. And I represent a town now, which is a working town in Swindon. I'm proud to represent it. This is the problem. People don't like being insulted. When you say that the Tories are a bunch of crooks and that they're the upper classes and that they're money classes, it's not only wrong, it's disrespectful. Learn some respect about politics, and then people like Martin might give you an audience.
Right, Paul, I'm sorry to cut you, but we're not going to get any other questions unless I step in. So let's take a question now from Tim. Tim Down.
Hi, Fiona, panel. Does the SNP really have a mandate for a second independence referendum?
I was going to come to you on this, actually, Robert. I wonder why.
I think last time when the referendum was agreed, remember David Cameron, the Conservative government, the Conservative
I certainly do remember it. I think we all do.
The referendum. There was a consensus, actually, in the Scottish Parliament and amongst the political parties. Everybody agreed. The Conservatives agreed. Labour agreed. Everybody agreed within the Scottish Parliament that the time was ready for a referendum. And, of course, we know what the result was. Now, we're not in that position. In 2011, Alex Salmond won an absolute majority in Holyrood. Now, the SNPs, no doubt, have done very well, and we're not going to try and pussyfoot around the result, but they don't have an absolute majority. Yes, the Scottish Greens have indicated that they're in favour of a referendum.
Very strongly.
Yeah, but there is no
on
consensus.
This programme only a week
the Scottish Labour Party don't agree, the Scottish Liberal Democrats, the Scottish Tories do not agree. And just think of the times in which we're living. We've all come through and are still coming through the most serious challenge to our health and our economy and our welfare in living memory. We're not out of the woods yet. Why on earth would you start contemplating your constitutional navel and argue about issues of separation when the common priorities of the people of Scotland, of people of Northern Ireland, people of Wales and England are to get through this crisis?
But the question is, do they have a mandate? Do they have a mandate?
Well, I think
yes or no?
I think that they've clearly won an impressive result. Do I think that they have established the consensus to have a referendum now?
No, I'm not. The question is not do they have a consensus. The question is, do they have a mandate?
I do not
yes
think.
Or no?
I do not think that at the moment they should be pushing for a referendum. I think now is absolutely not the time.
Kate.
Well, Robert's party won less of a vote share in 2019 and used that as a mandate to push through a hard Brexit that Scotland rejected. In last week's election, we got almost 48% of the constituency vote. There is a clear mandate with a majority of pro-independence MSPs in the Scottish Parliament. There were clear commitments in our manifesto, in the Greens manifesto. Usually opposition parties and journalists are holding us to account to deliver our manifesto. And in that manifesto, there was a clear and set out position for another independence referendum. Now, I agree to an extent. We have said that our focus right now is on the crisis. And when the crisis is past, we should give that opportunity to the people of Scotland to have a say on whether they want their future to be dictated to them by a Conservative government. The majority of Scotland has rejected.
Kate, let me ask you this: if Nicola Sturgeon has,
yes,
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but let me just ask you this: Nicola Sturgeon has ruled out holding a sort of wildcat illegal referendum if the UK government doesn't give consent. The UK government isn't giving consent at the moment, with no sign of when it's going to do so. So how are you going to resolve this?
Well, can I just say how ridiculous that situation is? That Boris Johnson, again, the leader of a party that has been rejected consistently in Scotland since 1955, is telling the people of Scotland that have just voted overwhelmingly for pro-independence MSPs.
So how are you going to resolve it?
Democratic way. There is no democratic way to deliver that. So I would hope that we become Democrats again, respect the way that the people of Scotland voted. All parties signed up after 2014 to the Smith Commission that said that there was nothing to stop people in Scotland from voting for independence. And at its very heart is a question for all of us, which is this union one based on a partnership of consent, or does it only exist through force of law? And that is a fundamental question that we all face right now. And I think increasingly more and more people see that the democratic route to putting that question back to the people is the most important one.
OK. Andrea, in our audience.
Hi, Fiona. Thank you. So I'd just like to say the last independence referendum we had in Scotland was very divisive for families and friendships. And we are still healing from that independence referendum. We've still not got over it. Now, in the recent leaders' debates in Scotland, you know, our Scottish leaders were fighting like rats in a sack at the debates about independence. There was no talk about social care. There was nothing about tackling child poverty. You know, education, where are our teachers? And Nicola Sturgeon herself admitted in one of the debates that she'd taken her eye off the ball. And, you know, Kate is a fine example of everything that's wrong with the SNP. As we were talking about the problems with Labour, Kate actually cannot stop herself from bringing up the Constitution. And it is just a never-ending that needs to be brought to a close.
Okay. Craig?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I would make. The first one being that there's 72 MSPs have been sworn in today who support independence. So I think it's a bit naive to say that there isn't a majority in the Scottish Parliament to proceed. The second point is that the whole argument around Boris Johnson being able to say whether or not he thinks we should have an independence referendum, I think ultimately he's going to have to go ahead with it because that's how democracy works. And I think to do anything differently would be, you know, the whole world is watching and we have to, you know, be democratic and irrespective of the Scottish people that voted.
Chris?
Interesting that there is so much talk about what is democratic. The number of people who actually voted in the Scottish elections, who voted for SNP, comes to something like 2.5% of the total population of the UK. Now, that is not a democratic figure for saying that they should have the right to break up the union. 49% is not a total majority. And that even if we were assuming that every single person who voted for the SNP was in favour of independence, you still don't have a majority. If you want to have a referendum, an indicative referendum to suggest that there should be a real referendum on Scottish independence, shouldn't we actually be looking at whether Scottish independence is actually viable? I mean, I could decide that our village ought to go independent and put a man on the moon. Doesn't mean I can do it. And I don't think that anybody is really looking at whether or not there is a way in which Scotland can afford to fund itself. Is it going to be allowed to join the EU? Is it going to be able to manage its own affairs in the way it thinks it's going to be able to? Nicola Sturgeon has complained so much about having a border down the middle of the North Sea, down the middle of the Irish Sea, but she wants to put one right across the mainland of the United Kingdom.
Paul?
I think the short answer is yes. There is a mandate for a referendum. It would obviously be sensible for that not to be soon. But to the people who are, intensely interested in whether the Scots can go independent or not, it's not your business. Under international law, nations have the right to self-determination. That is not just international law. It was recognised when David Cameron said to the Scots, if you vote for independence, you get independence. It's why Ireland, by the way, is independent and not part of the United Kingdom. So, however, the point is that independence will be difficult. It will be difficult. Either Scotland will be part of the European Union and its currency, or it will be part of basically a currency union with Britain that gives the Bank of England more or less economic control over Scotland. And the Scottish National Party knows this, and it's so far been playing a kind of game. We want independence, but not quite yet. So what happens there is that all the other important questions, like poverty, inequality, dealing with the 21st century's technological revolution, get sidelined because the electorate is rightly worried about being trapped in a never mind never-ending. It's a never-ending Tory elitist rule, and that's how it's perceived in Scotland. I became convinced covering that referendum in 2014 that the rising generation of young Scots allowed to vote at 16, when they've got 16-year-olds, it's game over. I mean, I think we, the English, the Welsh, probably have to accept that. And I know Lisa won't agree with me, but I wish my party, Labour, would begin to accept and prepare itself for the very exciting prospect of a socialist republic of Scotland.
You say Lisa won't accept. I mean, Keir Starmer said in January last year, of course, if there's a pro-independence majority, it has to be looked at in Westminster. I don't think it's right to block anything. So that sounds like, yes, Labour thinks the SNP does have a mandate for a second independence referendum.
Well, no, I think Nicola Sturgeon can't have it both ways. She said very clearly in these elections that people could happily vote for the SNP if they were pro remaining in the United Kingdom, safe in the knowledge that they would be voting for an SNP government with a much broader agenda in a broader set of elections. And now she's claiming that she has a mandate from those people for independence. It was a hoax, frankly. It was exactly the same during the 2014 referendum when she and Alex Salmond said that this was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to settle the question. And now they say that they want to reopen the question.
I don't think it's right to block anything.
What
is your policy?
I don't think you can claim that this is a mandate for independence when Nicola Sturgeon herself went out and sought votes on the basis that you could be pro the future of the United Kingdom and Scotland in the United Kingdom and still vote for the SNP. Look, I do recognise that there is a problem here because you have a number of people in Scotland, a sizable number of people who are deeply unhappy with the status quo. And a number of those want to see Scotland leave the United Kingdom. I believe it's incumbent on all political parties, including my own UK-wide parties, to show that by being in the United Kingdom, Scotland is better off. And I believe we have to make that case. And I think that's particularly the case where you've got a government in Westminster that has consistently failed to stand up for the interests of people in Scotland, whether it's over Scotch whisky tariffs or the offshoring of industry, as they failed to stand up for people in Greater Manchester, wherein I'm an MP. And I recognise that has to change. But the idea that in the middle of a global pandemic, after years and years of division, we found multiple ways to divide ourselves from each other over recent years, that what we should be focusing on is yet more division, yet more navel-gazing, when we've got serious problems to solve, like the growing waiting list, the crisis of social care, and the lack of jobs in many parts of this country. I think that is completely wrong. We've got to focus on the country and what unites us right now.
Michelle. Does the SNP have a mandate?
So the Scottish elections, as everyone will know, are slightly more complicated than ours. There's 2 votes. And I would say that actually Scotland is a country that is almost down the middle, divided 50 and 50, because actually when you look at the outcome, one of the votes was won very smallly by pro-union parties. One of them was won by pro-independence parties. 2014, we was told, once in a generation, once in a lifetime vote. However, I do believe that there is, that you have to now, the Tories can't block this referendum. The time for this is not now, everyone knows that's obvious. But you can't block this referendum because it's undoubtable that the situation has now changed. In 2014, we was in the EU. We are now not. The landscape has changed. So I do believe that when the time is right, so after all of this pandemic, Scotland should be given the choice as to whether or not they want to stay or leave. However, the 2 caveats I would make to that is it's been 7 years since the last referendum, and I still don't understand even an ounce of what Scotland's economic policies and plans would be. For example, how on earth you think you would fund this deficit as an independent country is beyond me. And the EU are going to be in a very tricky position because the EU can't be seen to encourage Scotland to leave and rejoin. And by the way, we're assuming Scotland can rejoin the EU. They might not even meet the criteria. Scotland cannot be seen to be overly encouraging this because if they do, they're going to have it in the neck from the countries that are within the EU at the moment who have challenging separatist movements that the EU need to not be stoking. So it's a very interesting point. But my final thing is, I don't share all of this enthusiasm about how amazingly well the SNP did at the last election, by the way, because they only gained 1 seat and they've only got a majority by teaming essentially with the Greens.
Kate, you've been wanting to come back in for some time.
I mean, first thing to say is that I think Lisa Nandy has just explained very well precisely why the Labour Party are 3rd in the Scottish Parliament and why they got their worst vote share, because it is a complete lack of respect for the voters in Scotland. And look, I don't expect everybody on the panel to agree with me on independence. That's clear. I don't expect everyone in Scotland to agree with me, or even in the Question Time audience to agree with me. But that is precisely why that question needs to go back to the people. Now, we are not arguing that that should be next week, next month. We are arguing that once the COVID crisis is past, but in time to equip the Parliament with the powers that we need to shape our future, there should be a referendum. Now, we live in parliamentary democracies. There can be no disputing the emphatic victory last week. And the only people who are saying no to another referendum are the people who are scared of the outcome. Debate the issues, debate the substance. Don't just keep saying no to the people of Scotland, because that means that this union has fundamentally changed from one based on consent, a voluntary union based on consent, to one that is only based on the force of law.
There's people in our audience here, some agreeing, some putting their heads in their hands. I want to move on, take another question, but I'm just going to hear quickly from a few of you. Andy.
I just want to say, you know, what planet are you guys on? We had a conversation not very 15 minutes ago, maybe, about being respectful, about supporting each other. We've got people mudslinging. We've got people. The question was, is there a mandate? Not who can tie each other up in knots and moan at each other. You know, this is a question we're trying as members of the public. And I say this to all panel members, as members of the public, we're trying to engage with you. Many members of this panel have said, let's not mudsling, let's not do this, let's not do that. How many times you're all sitting there saying you want to listen? Listen to us. Stop moaning at each other. Stop bitching at each other. Figure out how to work together. That is the only way this country is going to get better. You know, don't point at fat cats when the leader of the Labour Party's a very, very successful lawyer, you know, and you're pointing at fat cats in the Conservative Party. What a load of rubbish.
Okay.
You know, and if 48% is a mandate for a referendum, then how is 48% in the Brexit referendum a mandate to nothing? You can't just choose a percentage and choose what you want it to mean and say, OK, this now means we've got a mandate because I'm after this percentage.
All right, Nandy, we hear you. We hear you've got it off your chest and we're all grateful. Good for you. And we will all take that on board in this room, I am sure, as I go on to another question.
Fiona, could I just say one very quick thing, which is that, you know, I'm the first to accept that there's too much of this that goes on in politics, and all political parties do it and all politicians lapse into doing it, and our political parliament is set up like that to shout at each other rather than work together. And I think privately we've all had conversations about that over the years. But what I'm looking at on the screen, on every question that's come up so far, is a country actually where those divisions are very evidently on display. And what we've got to do now is find a way to bridge those divisions, where every question that's come up, every contribution that's been made, there have been people applauding, there have been people putting their thumbs down, there have been people cheering, and there have been people with their head in their hands. And I think, you know, don't underestimate how difficult this is and how much many of us are trying to find a way through some very, very difficult situations. I'm not saying that we get it right all the time. I'm not saying it's easy. But if you trash politics and the political process, in the end, what you find is that the real losers are the people themselves.
And I want to add to that, because actually that's a very powerful message, which is something that I've always believed in. But in the context of the question about the future of our very country, I want to talk about the positives of working together. You know, I'm a proud Welshman, but I love being part of Britain. You know, I feel Wigan is as much my country as Pembrokeshire. You know, Scotland is also my country. I feel passionately and I love it. And I think what we've been through with the vaccine, with the benefit system delivering, with the Treasury delivering furlough support for people across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. I think these are positives that should allow the arguments to be made.
The election has been
for
and
us
gone.
To stick. No, this is about.
It was the other week.
This is about independence. This is about separation from Scotland.
Okay,
I'm saying there's a positive case that we will continue to make.
We were just responding to what Andy was saying there, which was basically, can we have a bit more peace and love in the room? And Andy, everyone's hearing that. So let's see how we get with the next question then, which is from Molly. Molly, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Fiona. Will voter IDs protect the integrity of elections or just undermine the UK democracy?
Paul, kick us off with this.
Well, do you know how many people were convicted of voter fraud in the 2019 election? I think it's out of 32 million people who voted. Anybody know? Four. And two of them were for registering wrong. Criminally, they were convicted. I think the number of complaints was 136. So voter ID is not there to solve a problem that we, the people, see. And the people who've admitted this are the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission say our system is straight in this country. People worry about media bias. They worry about low turnout, but they don't worry in general about this. So I see this. What is this? It's straight out of the Donald Trump playbook. This is being done in Texas. It's being done in Georgia. It's being done by the American right. Right now, you suppress the vote of people who are unlikely to vote. Who's unlikely to vote if you have voter ID? 11 million people, right? Who are they? Poor people, black people, refugees. It's the people that the Tories don't want to vote for Labour. So I think, Robert, you've got to answer this. Is it even, what's the legality, what's the principle behind suppressing the votes of the British people just to get Boris Johnson another 4 years on his red velveteen settee?
Well, you've got to ask your own party, Paul, why they did it in Northern Ireland in 2003. There's been no evidence at all that the introduction of voter ID in Northern Ireland has done any of the things you said.
So why are you introducing it? Why do you want to introduce it across the rest of the UK?
I think it's important that in our society now, people undertaking normal transactions absolutely accept the point that with regard to specific transactions, a form of ID is a normal thing. Now, can I say, I'm very much against the general ID card policy. I don't believe in it, never have done. I campaigned hard against it 10 years ago.
Where is the problem that you feel you need to go to the expense and the effort of doing this?
I think that it's important that we maximise confidence. So I've heard over the years a number of people, you know, not just my constituents but other people, talk seriously about their concerns that in so many other walks of life you have to produce some form of identification.
So this is just based on anecdote?
You can walk into a polling station and there is no requirement whatsoever And this is a pretty important thing people are doing. Now, we're not saying suddenly you have to get a special form of ID or you have to go out and buy something that is going to disadvantage you. 98% of the people in this country have some form of identification. In fact, we're going even further to say that if there is an issue or a gap, then free identification will be issued to people who request it. So if you produce a blue badge, if you produce a number of identification processes that indeed are used by people at the, who are demographically disadvantaged, to lean into Paul's point, then there is no issue at all. It's good sense, and the majority of people in this country are wondering why on earth hasn't it been done before?
Do you think they're thinking that? Interesting. Well, we'll hear from our audience. Kate?
Well, I think Robert has just highlighted precisely why this is a bad idea, because he's already talked about multiple new hurdles that somebody has to jump over in terms of new documentation in order to be able to vote. No. And over the last few decades, if not centuries, we've seen successive governments try to expand the franchise, and yet this government seems to want to reduce it. The figures speak for themselves. Paul has already mentioned some of them. 3.5 million citizens don't have access to photo ID. 1.3 million people don't have a bank account. That makes mandatory voter ID a barrier to many people exercising their right to vote. And certainly we've seen from a Scottish Parliament perspective, cross-party agreement on expanding the franchise, making it easier for people to vote, whether they are refugees, prisoners, or young people. And I think that should be the direction of travel for all governments, make it easier, because ultimately we're accountable to them, and we should make sure that they are able to exercise their democratic right as easily as possible.
Let me just for a show of hands, just out of interest from our Zoom audience here, put your hand up if you have been concerned about voter ID up until now. OK, so we've got a couple there. Well, let's hear from you. Dave.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma. Ultimately, I mean, one of my thoughts is that, is this the backdoor approach to a national ID card system? I don't know. The other aspect is, yes, there is a possibility that, votes are rigged. We know that. That is a strong possibility. My main concern, realistically, with the ID system is, like anything else, it is open to abuse. And because it's open to abuse, it can lead to, unfortunately, the wrong direction in which the government wants to go.
OK. Molly, you asked the question.
The main issue is what lines you draw out, what type of IDs are acceptable, because there was a trial run and they turned away people with student cards, bus passes issued by the councils, and then none of them turned back up with correct ID. So you're just going to start discrimination against the electorate, which is a very dangerous road.
Michelle, are you in favour?
Yeah, to me, this is very simple. If I want to go get a letter from my post office, I've got to show that I am who I say I am on that letter.
But not with photo ID.
I am old enough
That's the critical
to remember,
difference.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that, don't you worry. I am old enough to remember Blockbuster Video. And when you're wanting to set up an account
who here remembers Blockbuster Video? We all do. Come on, Michelle.
You had to show you are who you say you are. I find it beyond backward that you can go to a polling station, walk up to the lady or the man or whoever on the desk, and they have in front of them a list of name and addresses and any old random, let's face it, because half the time you can see the list, because I've been there on polling days as a candidate, watching how they do things. Any old random can wander up and say, oh yeah, I'm Joe Smith from so-and-so, and in you go with no verification whatsoever. So if you need to prove ID to pick up letters, borrow this, borrow that, you absolutely should prove that you are who you say you are if you want to influence the direction that this country is going to be governed in. Now, a couple of key caveats to that. All of this talk about discrimination, if people haven't got access already to photographic ID, you must make it free to access photographic ID. If you started talking to me about charging people to access this card, I would be dead against it. Point number one.
But Michelle, the criticisms of this as a proposal is not so much that it would cost, because you're not suggesting it would cost, but it's just the time and the effort required for people to go and get this ID, and therefore it's a further barrier to them engaging in the democratic process.
Nonsense. If they, let's just say, if I said to someone now, I've got £1 million for you, you've won the lottery, got £1 million. But in order for you to get this money, you've got to prove that you are who you say you are. Guarantee you, not a single person is going to go, oh, I can't really be bothered. It's a barrier for me to go and get my identification. I think it's quite insulting to say, oh, you know, it's going to be really difficult for someone who's an ethnic minority to vote if you make them have an ID card. And the point that I think it was Molly that raised about people being turned away, this is another caveat. If you're going to introduce a system, you need to learn the art of communication and make sure that people understand clearly what you take to vote with you, what will be accepted and what won't be accepted. And you have to trust that people are capable of following basic instructions.
Lisa.
Well, it looks like Robert was nodding to all of that, so that was a very good lobbying job that you just did there, Michelle. I guess I feel like the government is trying to solve the wrong problem. In the 2019 election, you were more likely to win the jackpot of the National Lottery than you were to be convicted of impersonation at the polls. And meanwhile, the government has been sitting for 18 months on the Russia report, which said that the greatest threat to our democratic integrity came from overseas, from foreign interference in our elections. That report made 23 separate recommendations, and in 18 months, not a single one of those has been implemented. One of them, very, very simple, currently a middle-ranking government department holds responsibility for defending our democracy. The Russia report could not have been clearer that it was given absolutely zero priority within government. They recommended that that should be boosted up to the highest levels with MI5 or someone similar taking over responsibility. 18 months and the Prime Minister has not done a single thing about it. I would say to the government, if you're serious about defending the integrity of our democracy, then instead of making it harder for people here to have an influence over the outcome of our democratic elections, you really should be making it harder for people overseas, including foreign donors, to influence the integrity of our electoral systems.
You got your priorities right.
Well, look, I'm not going to comment about matters of national security.
No, but you can comment about the principle.
Yeah, the principle, I think, is an important one here. There is no evidence to say that voter participation goes down with an ID system. Canada do it, France do it. Other major European democracies have some form of ID for voters at the polling station. That is what we're proposing. We'll get the rules right when we go through the debate.
But Lisa's point is, are you targeting the wrong issue? Do you want just to address Lisa's point?
Oh, no, I don't think we are at all. You see, I don't think we are at all. I think it's a choice. I think that the truth is that on all fronts we are doing everything. No, it's not a choice. We're doing everything we can.
You've chosen not to do one, and you've chosen to do the other.
Well, I disagree with your respect, Lisa. I disagree with your analysis here. That I think it's incumbent upon the government to do all it can on all fronts, which I can assure you we are doing. I want to protect this democracy as the Prime Minister. And we certainly have benefited, frankly, from increased voter turnout. If you see the last couple of elections where voter turnout has gone up, then it is the Conservatives who have won. So let's not buy into this false argument about voter
months to
suppression.
You accepted the Russia report. You accepted that this was the greatest threat to our democratic integrity. You've had 18 months. The Prime Minister sat on that report. He tried to suppress it. He wouldn't allow it to be published. He blocked its publication in Parliament. Then he said he accepted it, and still we've seen no action. Why are you so intent on stopping people here having an impact on our electoral system, but not on stopping people overseas?
I'm sorry, I don't agree with your analysis.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question quickly. We're almost out of time, but a number of people suggested this. Charlie Owen.
Hi. Do you have any recommendations on how to hug cautiously?
Paul?
It's hugging day, isn't it, coming up? And I think we all know what we're talking about. For lots and lots of young people who don't live in families, haven't been able to date, haven't been able to meet each other, I would say, no, don't be cautious to those who are being allowed to hug for the first time on next Monday.
Michelle?
How to hug cautiously? Probably get a partner who annoys you as much as my partner annoys me. Then you probably would never want to hug them. You wouldn't need guidance of caution, I can tell you. But
Is it you going to be watching this, Michelle?
I'm only joking. No, but joking aside, do you know what? We have been denied human touch and connection, and we cannot underestimate what that has done to people's mental health. If you want to go hug somebody, you know, and it's a good job I'm not in government because I would be in trouble for saying this, just go hug them, use your common sense, get involved and just feel good again. That's what we need.
Kate, have you got any concerns about it?
I can't wait to give people hugs. I'm a big fan of the side hug, which just as a recommendation, but otherwise...
Oh, you might have to talk us through that. What's a side hug?
Oh, you know, when you cautiously sidle up to somebody you do know and you are familiar with.
Robert, you're hang on, Kate. Robert's giving us a demonstration.
The side hug, the side hug. We're familiar with it. Yeah, it's good.
So is that what you're going to
do? But I would just say, get involved and give people hugs.
So you're going to be side hugging, are you? So what is it? How does this cautious hugging work then?
Well, look, I think have your own unofficial list. Hug your mum, hug your dad, hug the people who are close to you in your family. I mean, you know, I think hugging is fantastic, but I think we can trust everybody to use common sense. In fact, that is what the government is saying. Use your good sense. But let's get back and let's get hugging in a sensible and safe way.
And at the risk of sounding like a total killjoy, the news about the Indian variant in the UK, is that giving the government pause on hugging advice and general lifting of restrictions?
Well, as we always said that the rise of any new variants would be a very important factor in working out how we went through the roadmap. Now, the 17th, I think all systems go. It's absolutely right that we do that. We always said that these dates were at the earliest, and therefore we'll keep on reviewing the position very carefully. Prime Minister quite rightly has said we all need to just take care and watch the evidence about new variants.
Well, he says the variant's making him anxious.
Well, anxious, yeah, of course we're anxious, because we've been through so much together, haven't we? All of us. We want this to be over. Human nature is that we want to look forward to better times, but we also have to look at that evidence and be cautious but irreversible. That is the plan. That is what I very much hope and believe we can stick to.
Lisa.
I mean, I got slightly worried about where that conversation was going, to be honest. When we started talking about hugging each other, I went back to what Andy was saying earlier about can you all just stop fighting with each other and find a way to work together. And I had the feeling that somebody, perhaps Andy, was going to tell us all we had to get up and hug each other, which, no offence, guys, but...
Thumbs up from Andy.
The first person I hug is not going to be one of the panellists, I can tell you, after a year of not being able to do it. I mean, I guess I would just say I can't wait, like everybody else, like Kate and everyone else, to be able to hug, not side hugs, proper hugs. But I just, you know, I think this Indian variant is a real problem. And I agree with Robert that we've got to come through this together. People have made huge sacrifices so far, and we've got to make sure that we get this right. I would just put in a plea to say that there are parts of this country now that have been, including mine, that have been in near continuous lockdown for over a year. And if we're going to move forwards, we've got to move forwards in step. We can't be saying to people in those parts of the country, you haven't hugged your mum for a year and we don't know when it's going to end. We need to see the government coming forward and getting back on the front foot about this and giving people clarity and saying the country will move together. And then, if you do that, Robert, this is a promise, I will give you a hug.
You heard it here, folks. And just briefly before we end, are you concerned that perhaps we are then going to be easing restrictions too quickly?
No, I want to see restrictions eased as soon as possible, like everybody else, but I don't want to see us unravel the progress that we've made, and I want the country to move forward in step together. We had lots of confusing tier systems over the last year, and I think what we've seen is that in the end that doesn't really work. We've got to make sure that we give people clarity. We need, you know, if there's going to be a new timetable, we need to hear about what that is and the basis on which that is. And then we've got to get back to normal as soon as we can. This has got to be the last lockdown. We've got to move out of this. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Let's not reverse that progress now.
Well, our hour is up. We're not going to all break out into hugging after this, I promise you. But who knows what could happen? I don't know when it's all allowed. My goodness, all bets are off. Thank you very much to the panel for coming on this evening. Kate, thank you very much for joining us down the line. Always good to have your presence on the programme. And thank you very much to our QT50. Thank you for all your points. And Andy giving everybody a dressing down as well. Very good to hear what you had to say. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching from Question Time. Bye-bye.
The best part of that show was that lady's rant. It was epic. She got to sit there and stop bitching at each other on the BBC. And I mean, they're like, I mean, I'm allowed to swear. Mind you, this after the watershed. Those kids in bed by now. But yeah, there you go. Question time, ladies and gents. Back on Sunday, methinks. So enjoy the rest of your night, and I will catch you on Sunday for some Andrew Marr.